So I'm going to have to make a second part of this, even though there was no intent to. Apparently, somebody is back in viewing me as I record this, which is interesting because it's not plugged in and it's not online, and they just took the camera down because they did not want it to be a consistent file. And unfortunately, that is very, very significant and evidentiary, but I'm not going to stop. I'm going to continue. Now, one of the reasons I put this on pause as I did is because I have voice recordings of my responses that I did um, in regards to a case that was put before the Supreme Court, Trump versus New York. My understanding is that this was presumably or allegedly about information connected to the president's obligation to report on and provide an official report regarding census data by the end of the calendar year 2010 or 2020. And the consideration was, well, what was going to be the data and how was the data going to be pronounced. Insofar as that's the case, it's also Trump versus New York. And so this is important to mention because additionally on March 11th, there is also a memorandum on making general use respirators available under healthcare. Now, it is known, and this is one of the things we're going to be discussing moving forward, that there were reports, including whistleblower reports, that I would have characterized or allowed to be accepted as a whistleblower report, i.e., someone who is a paid and official medical professional who has gone to an emergency situation and is providing emergency response regarding medical matters, and in the course of that is trying to document and expose how a lack of appropriate policy implementation is compromising patient safety as well as potentially revealing other crimes. That's something I personally believe should have been acknowledged as a whistleblower report and should have been protected and supported as a whistleblower report. I saw at least one person specifically working in an emergency room in New York City during the onset of the coronavirus, or the now they call it COVID-19 crisis. And her specific and primary concern, which has been supported by other people, was that there was a misrepresentation of the actual need for ventilators for people that were being diagnosed early with COVID 19. And one of the concerns that was discussed had to do with the understanding that medical providers that provided these ventilators were entitled to bill for provision of the ventilator per patient up to a certain amount. That specific amount that was reported on at least twice, and which can be cross referenced with information directly from the Health and Human Services Administration, specifically regarding waivers that were issued in connection with a variety of matters related to the relief. That had, in some cases, on a state by state basis, more than one period for application and appeal. Not only have specific dates associated with them that I believe can also be cross referenced, but also had specific metrics in terms of the amount. It factors very prominently into concerns, and I believe would have been a substantiation of her accusations, or rather her concerns. Her concerns being that actual medical necessity was being intentionally compromised because there was a priority in regards to specific kinds of financial arrangements that had been allowed to be permitted under the auspices of it being an emergency need. Which then brings up the question of, was it actually an emergency need? Or was it some hoax or some sort of situation wherein people were orchestrating it in a manner to exacerbate the actual need because there was a prioritization of meeting certain kinds of financial indicators or financial expectations. And so then the considerations of patient safety and patient health care were put into consideration as if they were secondary to understanding that there was a priority around certain kind of economic data or economic information that was being sought. This economic information is something that would need more consideration, but in relationship to understanding the dates where these expectations were being set up and confirmed, then brings in the question of at what level are they being orchestrated? And then at what level is there a responsibility? So I bring this up because in the case of Trump versus New York, in so far as there were certain, shall we say, benchmarks or certain kinds of timelines that were in effect that would have proven the original theory that there was an intention in having these kinds of documents released at that time in order to correlate them with these specific Treasury issues. I believe that actually helped prove that this actually was intentionally set up, or rather delivered and dated for the time it was, in order to provide these reference points in consideration of these specific Treasury issues. Now, if you're going to do something of this sort and hope that in the course of so doing, you may be able to get what you would need in order to support a case before the Supreme Court, including one that's attempting to challenge very important constitutional precedents or establish a new precedent, one that might be considered unique. I won't use the other word, even though the other word could potentially be applicable. In this case, it would not be prudent to use that word. But the concern being that, is this something that is legal, first of all? And if it is legal, why is it not the kind of thing that we are educated about, especially if we understand we personally have a need for pursuit of justice? Now, see, this gets into other things that are part of what I have been tracking and part of what the impetus behind this was initially. The accusations of securities fraud, i.e., subordinating what are the actual requirements, expectations, or constitutional rights and duties associated with a specific kind of process to some other kind of financial consideration. And then the question being, well, what are the standards determining the financial priorities that would allow for constitutional considerations to be subordinated? In this case, we have a very sophisticated process with which to work. And so I will say that I made voice notes concerning a response to the case Trump versus New York 3 times. And in my voice recording files, I made it initially on December 18th of 2020. I also made some comments on January 14th of 2021, and I also made some comments as it was transitioning over the midnight hour in Dallas on February 19th through February 20th of 2021. Now, some of those comments are in one folder. The other comments are in another folder. I believe, if I'm correct, the reason those comments from the 14th are in another folder is because I was evaluating my understanding of Trump versus New York in connection with another case and another opinion on a case that was going to be something that would have been part of what I would have considered as part of my own attempt to pursue due process. But I don't want to bring that too much up into this, except to say that if, as I suspected at the time, there were actually some form of specific financial arrangement or some specific programmatic or strategic relationship that was correlating with these Treasury issues associated with these official government documents, that my understanding is these are official government provided documents, then the specific, one of the specific reference points, I believe, is this Trump versus New York case. And one of the considerations of it is the fact that the census was coded to a 30-year bond. But if you consider that 30-year bond in the context of also being issued on the same day as a 10-year note, then the auction for the 10-year note happened specifically in connection with the coronavirus.gov information that when cross-referenced with activities at the White House demonstrate that on the day of what would have been the auction of this, there was both a matter connected to immigration as it concerned what was identified as the 2019 novel coronavirus at the time, as well as provision of respirators as part of the response to COVID 19. Now, I did not start this specifically toward and with the people as part of some crime investigation. I was hoping it to be educational, but as I had already said, I was investigating crime. And part of the efforts at addressing the crime I was investigating were to try to come up with my own system for tracking acts of money laundering, as well as attempting to identify how financial crimes were connected to the other crimes for which I was attempting to seek redress. So I am going to stop that for today in this particular segment, and then I'm going to add on an additional segment on a separate file that is going to be, I guess, the third as part of this video. Please understand, though, this was supposed to be with that first video. They were supposed to be continuous with each other and would have been under 33 minutes where they have permitted to been put together.